Hey, what's up? Welcome to the first lecture on the heart. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got to talk about the heart for 3 lectures. We're going to start just with a basic idea. So we already know the heart is the pump of the circulatory system, the pump of the cardiovascular system. What is it is going to do? It, it is going to contract. Its muscular squeezing generates high pressure. High pressure forces blood to flow. Remember, things always flow down a pressure gradient from areas of high to areas of low pressure. So blood flows, blood gets to the tissues. This movement of blood to the tissues is called tissue perfusion. And the whole point, as we know, is to deliver the good stuff, oxygen, nutrients, and get rid of the bad stuff, CO2 and wastes. And thus, we maintain homeostasis. Cells stay alive, and of course, tissues, organs, organ systems, and you stay alive as well. So what we're going to do is knock out some of the basic anatomy of the heart, locational anatomy. I don't think locational is a word, but you get my drift. And then some anatomy of the wall of the heart. And then we'll get into a few other things. And then we'll do a lot more, as I know you know. All right. There is our heart. Look at it right there. See it tucked in behind some of the ribs and costal cartilage and sternum right there. Now that region in the thoracic cavity between the 2 lungs is of course called the mediastinum or mediastinum. Either is cool. And in there sits the heart. It is basically an inverted cone. So it has an apex and a base. The apex is pointing downward towards the left hip. Not always exactly towards it, but good general idea. Towards the left hip. The base is pointing roughly towards the right shoulder. You can see the green and blue arrows there indicating those directions. The heart is actually sitting on top of the diaphragm, rests on the diaphragm, that muscular partition between our thoracic and abdominal cavities. So there it is. There's the heart right there. It is medial to the 2 lungs. If we look at the picture on the right here, you see the nice pink lungs, non-smoker right here. And in between the 2 lungs, there is the heart right there. The heart, of course, is anterior to the vertebral column, which we see here, anterior to that squished esophagus that I'm mousing over right there. And the heart is, of course, just posterior to the sternum, as well as the costal cartilages, as we already know. All right, so there's the basic location of the heart. Now let's talk about the wrappings around it. Okay, here we see a heart, and what's going on here is we're looking at the removal of the fibrous pericardium. So the heart is surrounded by this collagenous sac, which is called the fibrous pericardium. Peri obviously means around. Think about perimeter, for example, and you've encountered the pericardium in AP1 if you can remember back. Now, it's called the fibrous pericardium because it is rich in collagen. It is crazy strong, and it provides a great anchor for the heart, prevents the distension, the overswelling of the heart as well. All right, that is the outermost wrapping, outermost covering of which we must be aware. Let's dig a little deeper. If we dig a little deeper, we find the serous pericardium. Serous pericardium is a double membrane, okay? Double membrane. Check out the heart on the left right there. So we got this heart right here. There it is. We got the left atrium. That's the chamber that we're about to expand. And what we're doing over here on the right is zooming in on the left atrium. Here's the wall of the left atrium right here. Here's the lumen of the left atrium. It's a fun word to say, lumen. And here is the pulmonary trunk, big artery going towards the lungs. So wall of the left atrium is right here, okay? Want you to notice a bunch of things. This red arrow indicates the outermost covering of the heart. So this is the fibrous pericardium. Notice how whitish it is drawn to indicate its collagenousness. All right, just deep to it, we have a double membrane structure. check out the black arrow here. The black arrow here is on the serous pericardium. It's on the serous pericardium here, okay? And the serous pericardium is going to come around and loop down, and then it becomes the serous pericardium again. So actually 2 layers to it, okay? 2 layers to it. The outer layer is called the parietal serous pericardium. The inner layer, purple arrow here, is the visceral serous pericardium. So the serous pericardium is made up of 2 layers, an outer parietal and an inner visceral. The reason why you've got 2 layers is that 2 layers creates a cavity for you, the pericardial cavity. Here it is where the green star is found. Now we want this cavity to be around the heart. Bear in mind the heart is not in this cavity. It's way too small for that. But we want this cavity because this cavity contains pericardial fluid, which is a serous fluid. Serous just means it's made from blood. And we want a fluid like this around the heart because this fluid is lubricating. So the heart's going to expand a bit and then squeeze and get a little smaller, expand again and squeeze. So the heart is moving, and the enemy of any moving part is friction. So by having this little cavity, a little bit of fluid in it, it lubricates, reduces friction, it eases the movement of the heart. All right, one other fun little fact. The visceral serous pericardium is also called the epicardium. We'll see that again in a second. All right, so check out how wrinkly and baggy the fibrous pericardium is, okay? There it is, in number 1 right there. And now what they're doing is they're going to slice the fibrous pericardium, cut it right down whoosh, like that, okay? And so you can still see the fibrous pericardium here. And now they peeled it back on the inside of the fibrous pericardium. We see the parietal serous. And then they peeled it back a little more. And now we see the heart itself. And on the heart itself, right there, that right there is the visceral serous pericardium, aka the epicardium. And the space that we opened up right there between here and here is the pericardial sac, where we would find the lubricating pericardial fluid. In the x-ray, kind of harder to see, but a trained individual can find all these things on x-ray too, which is pretty darn cool. All right, check this out. Heart wall itself, 3 layers to it. Outermost layer, kind of connective tissue-y. Look at the fat in there, but covered by a slippery, simple squamous epithelium right there. There it is. There it is. And this is the visceral serous pericardium, aka the epicardium, the thing on the outside of the heart, literally. Then deep to that, the middle muscular layer, the myocardium, the middle muscular myocardium, and the deepest layer itself, the endocardium. Again, simple squamous epi, a little bit of supportive connective tissue. Of course, we got fluid in here, fluid against this guy, fluid over here. So where we got fluid, we got simple squamous epithelium. All righty. Quick question for you. I ask you guys this question in class about this knight who got stabbed. Let's talk chambers now. Heart is a hollow organ. It's got 4 chambers. 2 superior chambers called atria. See the green star, greenish star in there. The atrium, architecturally speaking, is a receiving chamber in your house. So, not surprisingly, the atria, where the heart receives blood. So if your house is big enough, you can have a receiving chamber where your butler can meet your guests, take their coats and things. All right, inferior to the atria, we have the 2 ventricles. The word ventricle means little belly, although they belie that term because they're the big part of the heart. They're muscular. They're the pump parts of the heart. Notice we got 2 of each, 2 receivers and 2 pumpers. Okay. Basic flow. Suppose we start in the systemic circuit. Systemic means of the body. So we have a lot of blood going through the tissues and organs of all the body. That blood, as it goes through the tissues and organs of all the body, gets deoxygenated. And it comes back to the right atrium. From the right atrium, we pass down to the right ventricle. The right ventricle then pumps blood to the lungs. In other words, it pumps through the pulmonary circuit. Pulmonary circuit is where we pick up oxygen, get rid of CO2. Then that freshly, bright reddish, oxygenated blood comes back to the left atrium, which passes it down to the pump, the left ventricle, which zooms it out to the systemic circuit, and we repeat for hopefully a long, long time. So that is the basic pathway. And what we're going to do is talk about the chambers in turn, starting with the right atrium. The right atrium, there it is, encircled with a green circle. It receives deoxygenated blood from the systemic circuit. And oh yeah, we say deoxygenated, but we're being kind of silly in a way. Not silly, that sounds the right word. We're kind of stretching the truth a little bit. The blood coming back to the right atrium is not technically deoxygenated. The word suggests a utter lack of oxygen, but that's not the case. It just doesn't have as much oxygen as the blood from the lungs, for example. Still may be 75% flush with oxygen. It's just less. Although it's just easy to say deoxygenated. All right, I won't speak of that again. Just want to make sure you know. So three main blood vessels bring in blood from the systemic circuit into the right atrium. All right, up top here, red star, or pink star, I guess. Why'd I have pink and red? That was silly, my bad. So pink star here, superior vena cava, brings blood to the right atrium, basically from structures above the diaphragm. Down here, red star, there it is, inferior vena cava, brings blood from the structures inferior to the diaphragm. More or less. Occasionally there's exceptions to that rule. There's also an opening right here where I got my black arrow. That is the coronary sinus, rather the opening to the coronary sinus, which is a big fat vein that actually drains the blood that was feeding the wall of the heart itself. Now from the right atrium, blood passes downward easily enough through the tricuspid orifice, the hole here between the right atrium and ventricle, past the tricuspid valve, this parachute-like thing, and we get in the right ventricle. All right, so that's the right atrium. Let's talk left atrium over here on the heart's left. You're right, of course, as you look at it. Remember, you got to flip it. Anatomical position. So, left atrium receives blood from the pulmonary circuit. The blood is oxygenated, flush, pretty much, hopefully, if you're a healthy individual, 100% saturated with oxygen. And, excuse me, that blood is coming from the lungs, from the pulmonary circuit. In other words, 4 vessels. We see 4 black arrows, boom, 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 boom. Those are the pulmonary veins, 2 from the left, 2 from the right. That blood hits the left atrium, passes downward through the mitral orifice. The word mitral refers to a mitre, which is a kind of hat that a bishop would wear. I don't know why I don't have a picture of one of those, but Google bishop hat and you'll see a mitre. The other one we saw earlier, I don't know why I didn't mention this, but I'll do it now. The tricuspid, the guy over here, tricuspid valve, has 3 flaps. We'll hit this again later, but the mitral valve is also called the bicuspid valve sometimes because it's got 2 flaps. All right. Atria. One more thing about them real quick. The atria are separated, okay? There is a wall between them. In lab, try and stick your finger from the right atrium and the left atrium, make them meet, you'll hit the interatrial septum. Do this with the sheep heart as well. All right? So you got a muscular wall, and basically it's this spot right here between the two atria, okay? Separates the two kinds of blood. All right, so in your adult, and pretty much by adult we mean if you're older than a week, you're basically have an adult heart. All right, the opposite of adult in this case is fetal. So pretty much post delivery, a couple days, I guess, 48 hours or so, I think is the magic number. But pretty much after that, you've got an adult heart. The adult heart has a depression. There it is, black arrow, in the intraatrial septum. It's on both sides. You can see it from the right and the left. And this depression is called the fossa ovalis, the roundish indentation. Now, the thing is, you have a depression there because you used to have a hole. When you were a fetus, floating around doing flips in the uterus, the fetal heart had a hole called the foramen ovale. There it is. There it is. And the foramen ovale, the roundish hole. So question is, why did the fetus need a hole between the right and left atrium? And it has to do with where that fetus happens to be. And we know the fetus is in the mom. The fetus is in the mom, right? Fetus is swimming around. She's swimming around the uterus. And the thing is, when the fetus is in the uterus, all of the gas exchange for the fetus is happening at this flat cake-like structure, the placenta. So fetal gas exchange is happening at the placenta. All right, there's no gas exchange in the fetal lungs. That, coupled with the fact that the developing lungs are fragile, all right, so no gas exchange, fragility, those two facts mean we want to avoid sending blood through the pulmonary circuit, or try and avoid as much as possible. You can't totally avoid it. And the thing is, we do this by having a hole between the two atria. The foramen ovale allows blood to be shunted from the right atrium directly to the left atrium. So when blood hits the right atrium in the fetal heart, the right atrial blood pressure is greater than that of the left. So most of the blood is going to flow from the right atrium to the left atrium. If you click this picture in when you're looking at the slides in your own, should hopefully, fingers are crossed here, it should open up a link which gives you an animation of this. If not, let me know. All right, so blood comes into the right atrium. Higher pressure there than in the left. So blood zooms right over to the left atrium, thus bypassing the right ventricle and the whole pulmonary circuit, which is awesome because the pulmonary circuit is fragile. High pressure blood could damage it, and it's kind of worthless to expend energy sending your whole blood volume, every minute basically, through that circuit if you ain't doing gas exchange. Now, bear in mind not all the blood goes through the foramen ovale. Some blood does go down into the right ventricle, and then there's actually another bypass that we're not going to really talk about. And then a little blood does go through the pulmonary circuit. Now, there's a valve to prevent backflow. And here's the awesome thing. When the baby is born and the baby takes that first big heroic breath, all of a sudden the pressures in the atria switch. Blood tries to flow backwards to the right atrium, and boom, that valve gets slammed shut. I'm trying to clap loudly. That's a horrible clap. A little better. That valve slams shut, stays shut. Tissue goes over it for a couple days. You no longer have a hole. Now you got a fossa ovalis. All right. Ventricles. They're the inferior chambers. They're the pumps. Look how big this ventricle is. Look at that left ventricle there. Right ventricle is no slouch. Atria are crazy thin here. Look how skinny these atria are. Tiny. But look at this ventricle. Boom. Big left ventricle. Huge. Big septum. Right ventricle. Not bad. Muscular ridges in here called trabeculae carnii. Trabeculae. ridges, struts. Remember you met trabecular bone last semester? Carnii, of meat, of flesh. So literally the trabecular carnii are the ridges of flesh. When you eat a heart, like you eat a cow heart, delicious, by the way, you're eating mostly the ventricles. That's where all the meat is. All right, cool. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Hopefully you guys are having fun. Probably not as much as I am, but hopefully. So right ventricle, there it is, getting deoxygenated blood from the right atrium, pumps blood up into the pulmonary circuit via this big blood vessel called the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk, any trunk, in fact, is a short fat artery. Separating the pulmonary trunk from the right ventricle, preventing backflow between them, is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Now, also bear in mind the tricuspid valve here, preventing any backflow up into the right atrium. Valves, by the way, prevent backflow. Of course, you can't just say that. You got to know where they're preventing, from where to where. So the pulmonary semilunar valve here prevents backflow from the pulmonary trunk to the right ventricle. The tricuspid valve prevents backflow from the right ventricle to the right atrium. I think of the tricuspid valve as the entrance door to the ventricle and the pulmonary semilunar valve as the exit door. And they're one-way doors, okay? They can't be pushed backwards. All right, left ventricle. There it is. There it is. Gets oxygenated blood from the left atrium. Pumps to the systemic circuit via the biggest, awesomest artery in your body, the aorta. Look at that aorta right there. It's the ascending aorta where the star is. Then we get the aortic arch. Then we get the descending aorta, which goes down to around your belly button. Check out the 3 branches of the aortic arch. Do not worry. We'll be naming those later. Black arrow right there. You can point at something hiding. The thing hiding right there is the aortic semilunar valve, which prevents backflow from the aorta back to the left ventricle. Meanwhile, the mitral valve over here prevents backflow from the left ventricle up into the left atrium. Look how thick and muscular the left ventricle is compared to the rather puny right ventricle. Appreciate that muscular difference there for a moment and then prepare for a somewhat surprising fact. Here's the thing. The ventricles, in terms of the volume of blood they pump, it's going to equilibrate. They average the same amount. They don't have to pump the same amount every beat, but overall they have to average the same amount. If they don't do that, you will die. Okay? Because remember, they are 2 pumps in series. One pumps blood to one circuit, and that same blood goes to the other pump, to another circuit, back to the other pump. So whatever one pumps, the other is going to get. So if they're not equal, blood is going to build up somewhere and you're going to die. So they pump the same volume. All right, ready? Ready to write this down? I'm going to ask you on your next exam, on your first exam, really, whether these 2 ventricles pump the same amount of blood or different. I'm going to camouflage the question in some way. I'm not going to straight up say, do they pump the same amount of blood? All right, not going to do that. But I'm going to ask you, all right? So why are they different sizes? Why is the left more muscular? Well, here's the thing. The left has a harder job. Okay? The right ventricle just has to pump blood to the neighboring lungs right next door. It doesn't take very much power. Doesn't require much pressure. Hence, not much muscle. But the left ventricle has got to pump blood to the whole entire gosh darn body. Tips of your toes, fingers, tops of your head. That takes more pressure. Thus, more muscle. Alrighty. Question for you right here. Boom. Another question for you right here. Do these. I'll ask you about these either in lecture or recitation. All right. Keeping on. Let's go. There's a special set of blood vessels that we see in this cast here, called the coronary circuit. This is like the blood vessels feeding the heart, at least the visible ones you can see with your naked eye, with all the heart itself removed. Kind of cool. Now, the coronary circuit is a special branch of the systemic circuit, provides blood to the heart wall itself. Now, all three layers of the heart need blood. I mean, all three are living tissue, living cells, but the myocardium is the neediest. It needs oxygen, nutrients, got to get rid of CO2 and waste. It is the thickest, and it's also the muscle. It's the most active, okay? So be aware of the coronary circuit. We'll learn some blood vessels of it soon enough. Last, but not least, before I lose my voice here, basically in the coronary circuit, excuse me, if blood comes out of your left ventricle, gets in the aorta, immediately off the first part of the aorta, like off the first, I don't know, a couple centimeters, you have a pair of coronary arteries, which are going to branch to give you more and more coronary arteries, which eventually give rise to coronary capillaries, which feed the heart tissue and then drain to coronary veins, which drain to a big vessel, which you saw in lab, called the coronary sinus, which then empties into the right atrium. All right, guys, see you in heart number 2.